Previously on agentpalmer.com, 20 movies that interest me in 2020, a review of Len Deighton's novel Goodbye Mickey Mouse, and after the last episode, I wonder if this podcast would do better as an adaptation or interpretation. This is the Palmer Files, episode 10, featuring the host of the Tell Me Stories podcast, Paula Allen, where we discuss storytelling, writing, podcasting, listening, and of course, we tell a few stories, including the unwelcome welcome at the beginning of our friendship. Let's do the show. Hello and welcome to the Palmer Files. I'm your host, Jason Stershik, also known as Agent Palmer, and on this 10th episode is host of the Tell Me Stories podcast, Paula Allen. Now, this episode was a promise to myself as much as it was to Paula, who was a big enthusiast of this project before it had a name, some episodes, and a feed. I had at one time promised Paula that she would be guest number 10 if I ever did launch a podcast. Well, not only have I launched the show, but I have reached the 10-episode milestone, and it was time to get my friend back on mic. She's the host of the Tell Me Stories podcast, which, while new episodes haven't been released in a while, episodes have been recorded, and you don't just have to take my word for it. She says so during the podcast. But why Paula? Besides the fact that she's a good friend, basically a sister to me, she's got amazing energy, and she can weave words with the best of them. When I talk about the original rough list of guests, some had topics and others didn't. But with Paula, storytelling was always going to be our topic. And we stayed pretty much on topic. But if we said anything you want to discuss, you can tweet me at Agent Palmer, you can tweet the show at the Palmer Files, and you can tweet Paula at stories_podcast. You can hear her show, the Tell Me Stories podcast, wherever you are listening to this right now, or you can visit tellmestoriespodcast.com. Don't forget, you can see all of my writings and the occasional story on agentpalmer.com. And remember, all of these links and those mentioned in the show will be in the show notes. So, without further ado, Paula, I wanted you to come on my show to talk about storytelling, because when I think of storytelling, I think of you.
Aw, that's so nice. I do a bit of storytelling. Got a bit of a podcast about a little bit about storytelling. Yeah,
you do. So
yeah.
I figure let's start here. Why is storytelling important?
I think storytelling is, I don't think it's just important. I think it's vital. I don't think humans exist outside of it. I think it is what binds us through time. I think it's a community maker, whether we like the story or not. Not just historically and ahistorically, but culturally. Like it exists in every culture throughout time and before time. It is the essence of what it is to be a human.
And this is basically one of your passions.
Yeah, that's a deep, deep question to just right off the bat, Palmer. Oh, my word. I think it's why I wanted to start podcasting. And it's actually not even why I wanted to start podcasting. I've been storytelling and collecting stories for so long. I just needed a medium to get them out. And that's what podcasting was.
Why podcasting? Why not just write them down?
I did. I wrote them down a lot. I had a blog for a really long time. I wrote for fanzines. I started a few different fanzines. I wrote for magazines. I wrote for online publications. You name it. I did it. I wrote. And then when I was done writing, I wrote a little bit more. The difference for me and what I've said, I think in my podcast, certainly in season 1 and 2, a bit more than 3 and 4, is the difference in audio storytelling is immense. It's so powerful. It is so powerful hearing someone's story in their own words And hearing someone retell the same story in their own words is still superpower. If it's a story they've told before and they tell it again, it's still 10 times better than you think it would be having seen it in the email ahead of time. Hey, I'm going to tell a story about this on your show. Is that okay? Absolutely. Yes. Let's go. And then you hear it. And even though you're prepared, you're still blown away.
Well, it's because it's all about details, right? It's not about, I went from A to B. It's how you got there. It's why you got there. It's how you felt on the way and how you felt when you got there. It's all those little things that wouldn't be in the email to begin with. Otherwise, they'd be sending you a novel. Yeah,
it's happened.
and the other part is there are things you can. I mean, I have a blog, but there are things that I cannot convey with words. All the punctuation in the world is not going to help me with a certain inflection and this has not happened on this show or any show I've really ever been a part of, but I can't make my voice crack. You know what I mean? Like that
happens on mine all the time. It's so weird. I'm just like interviewing musicians and they're like, fair enough. Their emotions are closer to the surface, but yeah, for me, it's the details for sure. It's also the inflection, the emotion, the rawness of it. It's not edited. I love when it's unscripted. Obviously, that's so much better. There's a reason reality TV became like the be all end all. It's beautiful seeing someone have an honest to God conversation with someone else and no one is telling them what to say. And it hasn't been like prettified and it hasn't been like scripted. It's so much better. And the stories, whether they're embellished or not, I'm sure they all are. And I've had a caveat at the top of a lot of my shows saying, I don't fact check. If you were in a different town than what you told me and you just don't remember it that way, I couldn't care less. I want to know the story and what it meant to you. And we've gotten some good stuff.
Well, that's a very interesting point because I feel like I'm thinking back on like the great stories I've ever heard or read or, consumed, right?
Yeah.
Some of the great ones are fiction, just
for sure.
Pure fiction. I mean,
I don't believe there's any such thing as pure fiction, but yes, close to.
All right, fine. I mean, in my head, I'm thinking about like elves and goblins and stuff.
So,
but those are still stories, right? And they're adventure and they're things to get lost in and things to learn from.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I don't want to go political, but I feel like we down here in the States need that a lot more now than we ever did before. Like we need the escape, but we need the escape with the, I don't know, Saturday morning cartoon parable at the end. Like, so you get like, well, in this episode, Palmer learned to share. Like we need these things like now
Palmer
more than
learned
ever.
to impeach. Get it done. Yeah, we don't have to get political because I'll talk all night from my beautiful perch in Canada. But I think the opposite of that. I think Americans need to be like way more plugged into what's happening. And fair enough, it's so scary. I'd want to escape too. But I think political change doesn't exist in a vacuum, I guess. So I would encourage everyone to be plugged in there. But within that, we're getting the greatest stories of our time. Would you have believed Watergate was a real thing when you were like growing up in the 60s? Neither of us did, but you know what I mean? And now kids of this generation are going to be like, can you believe what happened? And be like, yes. And we'll tell stories about it for generations to come.
Well, it's given our generation a new narrative beyond 9/11. Because we didn't have a moon landing. We didn't have an assassination. We didn't have a Woodstock, right? We didn't have an Altamont either. So we only had this one moment.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, where were you when 9/11 happened? That was our moment.
Yeah.
And now we have another moment. And listen, I really hope we get like a positive one. Like I hope we live to see some form of human on Mars. Like that would be great because then it would give us another story to tell. But right now, of things that have happened in our lifetime throughout either our nation or continent or world. It's all like we only have negative quivers.
Yeah.
like negative arrows in our quiver. Like we don't have any positive stories. There are positive stories on an individual level, which is where storytelling comes in again, because that's how we share that positivity.
Hopefully. I mean, I hope it gets to see a larger sphere. It's just not that current. I mean, I hope that changes for America. If I could lump you all in as one, which I never could. I've met too many good Americans. But yeah, I think it'll be good to have good stories again. And without getting too political, but of course we have to. That's the climate we're in. There's an old adage of every country has the government that they deserve. If it is a democratic government. Obviously, dictators don't count, and it's true. So when Trump got into power, everyone was like, "Oh my God, how?" And I was like, "If you don't know how, you haven't been paying attention." And now I think this actually is the beginning and the strife and the beautiful story of America. We're just in the shit phase of it right now. And it's going to be like how people who are actually good triumphed over evil. And it is going to be a great, great story to tell your kids and your grandkids. It's just not fully written yet. I hope it goes well. But the country needed a shakeup. It did. And it super got one.
Yeah, it really did. But the thing that astounds me a bit is the argument of what will you tell your kids? Like, will you tell your kids you voted for him? Will you tell your kids you voted against him? Or, and that's always the argument, right? Like,
is it really?
For doing...
That's so immaterial and temporal.
Yeah, for doing something now, both sides are saying, like, will you tell your kids it's... And listen, it depends on which side of the aisle you're on, right? So, right, if you're pro-Trump, then the argument ends up being not about him. It being, what will you tell your kids? Will you tell your kids you stood up for your guns, to hold on to your guns? And on the other side, it's like, well, will you tell your kids you didn't stand up to, Trump? Like they want you to be the lead, like both sides in trying to politicize and propagandize the issues want you to be at the center of the story. And
interesting.
I don't know if it to me, like even hearing the words coming out of my mouth, it sounds like a wholly Americanized version of the way things are, because we're not all we're all at the center of our own story. Sure. But we're not at the center of everything.
Have to be, but in terms of handing stories down generationally, there's no such, like, if stories existed in a vacuum, they would just be silence. There's no such thing as like an individual story. Even like a road trip story, like, hey, I took this incredible journey. Or like, you didn't meet or see any other human. There was no interaction. Then you didn't grow, because people don't just grow and learn by doing. It is among others in which we actually grow, and then have a story to tell about it. And moreover, can't tell a story to a ghost. You have to have another person there. So.
All right. So hold on. We're going to take a trip, because I have a question. You and I met after I took a road trip, and you took a road trip, actually.
Yeah. Which one of us drove further? I think you did.
I think I did. I think.
Yeah, you did.
I don't know. I basically went west and took a right and went north. But we both took a road trip, and we took that road trip because we met online.
Yep.
So do online relationships matter in terms of that storytelling? Can I take that trip and meet people digitally?
In terms of storytelling?
In terms of experiencing something that might be story worthy.
I guess it sort of depends on what the exchange is. Like, what are you guys meeting about and for? And Yeah, I honestly think almost any experience at all can become a story if you're a good storyteller. And that is, I think, a developed skill and a taught skill. I don't know that just sitting on your computer and never leaving your dwelling is going to produce the same quality of story. But we've also, taken sci-fi journeys, and they have been for me in the reading and telling and retelling of wonderful sci-fi stories as real as anything else, as beautiful and wonderful and meaningful. But I feel like your leaving the Shire was very good for you.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
I mean,
In terms of stories, I feel like you have some stories from that trip.
I definitely do have some stories that trip, but I mean, all of those stories started well before I got in my car.
Yeah,
too.
I just like the idea of those stories kind of, maybe not the stories themselves, but of the journey coming to life. It's like Five-O Goes West in 3D. It's just great. It's having, I think that's true of like any kind of online experience where you can take it into real life, into real time, then you kind of see what they're made of. But you and I were having a nice discussion before we hit record, wherein you were talking about you love to really listen to albums to get to know a band now. And I don't know, maybe I'm not staunchly, I probably was before you said that. Hey, I only know what a band is made of once I've seen them live. And I still stick to that in terms of lived experiences. I think you get better stories out of it.
No, that's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. But I mean, when it comes to the band thing, I feel like it's probably changed in our lifetime. And I say that because during the CD era, which is what I'll call the 90s, they were making money hand over fist, and they could tour because they wanted to.
Right.
And I feel like at least now on the larger scale of bands, maybe not the indies so much or the secondary bands, but the major bands are now touring because they have to.
Yeah.
And
I think it's only been good for them, and better music has resulted.
I just haven't seen that much from the major bands that I'm not calling anybody out, but I haven't seen anything other than like it felt like another day at the office.
I don't really like, I'm not a huge fan of major bands anyways. Like I've always gone indie, I've interviewed indie. I've had quite a few major bands on the show, and it's rare to find they are as interesting. I think they've been doing the same thing too long. Some of them have like great stories, like, oh, like I was hanging out with the Rolling Stones, and you're like, not everyone has that story.
It's
or
surprising that not everybody has that story. The Stones have been around for forever.
Yeah, and they've been everywhere forever, drinking vodka and eating salads. But I feel like the indie bands always have better stories because there's more struggle and strife. I feel like it's a more hero-based story where you're like, they had to overcome something, whereas major bands maybe had to overcome a 4-star hotel versus a 5. I don't know. And maybe that's, the pauper in me just like calling out rich people. I don't know.
Well, hold on.
I'm like, I didn't find them that interesting.
It goes back to something that Kristen and I talked about when we were talking about writing in episode 2 of this show, if anybody wants to go back, if you're just starting now. And that was the idea that because I grew up in a middle class household, and because I grew up in a fairly I won't say like rich, like upper class, but like I was middle class privileged, I guess. I was never going to write good poetry. But I don't...
Do you think so?
I don't know. Like, okay, so I thought that at the time, and that was the joke that I shared with my parents.
Yeah.
I don't know if I believe that anymore, but I will say that strife and struggle do make for better stories. So in theory...
Yeah.
Maybe I don't necessarily believe it. Like, I could have ended up writing better things back then, but maybe they would have been even better had I struggled a little bit more. I don't know. It's just,
Yeah.
there's a part of me where I don't subscribe to the whole, you know, oh, the light bulb goes on. Okay, I can write. Like, whether it's a post or a story or whatever.
Like sudden inspiration?
Yeah, like sudden inspiration. Like sometimes it's work. Like artwork is work and that kind of stuff. But
yeah, I think writing in general is grudge work. It is sloughing through day after day, edit upon edit, humiliating rejection upon humiliating rejection. That's what writing is. The moments of like beautiful inspiration are the gifts in between.
yeah, I mean,
Like I think it's both.
okay, that's fair. I mean, because I've obviously experienced both. I mean,
Me too.
the one story that we were supposed to talk about on your show, if I ever get a chance to be on your show.
Dude, I haven't even edited things from August. It's December, okay?
I got it.
I'm in over my head.
But
I'm starting 3 companies. I'm busy. Yeah. But yes, one day.
But that story came together for me. Like,
hey,
ridiculously just kind of, here it is for you. If you can write it fast enough, you won't lose it.
Yeah. And I like those. There's a lot of schools of thoughts like that where you're like, oh, I think here's something beautiful. And if you want to capture it and do something with it, you can have it. If you don't reach out and grab it, I'm moving on.
I can tell you, I know I've been there. Like, I feel like every creative's been there where it's like, oh, last night in a dream, or like, you know, while I was driving home in my car, I had like this epiphany. And by the time I got to where I was going or could stop and pull over and pull out a pad of paper or my phone to record it, like it was gone.
Yeah. I start saying them out loud now. And then I audio remember them. I'll be like, oh my gosh, this is a great idea, Paula. And then I'll say it with my name in the sentence a few times because that's also a memory trigger. And then when I get home or pull over or can like record it to my phone, then I do. Little trick there for anyone who's trying to creatively remember stuff.
So
just say it out loud.
So you still write? Like,
yes.
Like, you're a very busy person.
Accurate.
First of all, where do you find time, or is it just if something strikes you, find a piece of paper?
I feel like the writer writes always. That is totally cliche and 100% accurate. I don't know if I've had a day where I didn't write. I'm compelled to. It's a push. It's not a pull. I have to write. I don't know what my identity sphere kind of looks like without a pen in my hand or a laptop clicking away. And they're not all diamonds. A lot of them are useless and don't go anywhere. But no, I always write. Always.
And I mean, listen, we all have millions of unfinished things. Right? Like,
I build a house with my million unfinished things.
Yeah, I mean that's the truth. Like, I have a document where I try and keep all of my in progress drafts.
Oh, what a depressing thing to own. I would never open that.
Well, it's where I work, right? Because I'm like, all right, well, this is, you know. But I feel like it's up to like 95 pages now.
That's crazy.
Like,
that's honestly, I couldn't mind through. I'd be so upset. Just the first one, I'd be like, oh yeah, I didn't finish. I just feel like, here's my litany of
all right, well, okay. But so we're coming to the end of the year.
Yeah.
And in order to create my blog schedule for the next year, I start with all of the blogs I skipped from the current year.
You're a total masochist. You really are. But I've seen your schedule and you're so disciplined. Like, it's great. It's completely enviable. I just could not survive it.
Well, what makes it...
I get a lot done, though. I'm not as organized.
Well, no, that's fair. I mean, I will say one of the things that I have the benefit of is like, it's like, that's a movie over there I want to review. Like, I have something that I remember watching it, or You know, I've watched it a dozen times. I have something to say about that film. And then it gets replaced by like a book I read or something, and it gets moved out of the schedule. And then I never put it back in. And then I come to the next year and it gives me a place to start. But we're not talking about fiction, which, by the way, like that one piece I wrote.
Yeah.
I haven't written fiction since. And
really,
it's you know what? It's very odd because I also like occasionally dust off like one of the 2 finished short stories from like long ago. And I go like, these are like from college and they were maybe not polished, but there's something here. And I look at them and I go, I don't know if I have anything left to add to this story.
Yeah, right now, but you kept it for a reason, right?
I guess either that or I'm just an idea packrat.
I was gonna call you, you're like a writing hoarder. You might be. I mean, I don't know. Like my laptops, plural, are like filled with a lot of unfinished writing, but I don't consider them to be lost causes. They just are in that form as they are because the story's not done yet. And when it is, I'll know it and write it in there. And I find as I age, I don't know what it is, like my writing style changes with the seasons. I don't know how to always go back and make it fit, but I can make the idea fit. But the writing style and the making it sound goodness is not always there.
Well, I mean,
so going back is really hard.
But that's about like that first draft is all about just getting it out. It's like the purge from your soul. It's like, I got to get this down.
Especially if it's been ruminating. You're like, oh, just get off. Like I need it out and away so then I can look at it from here. And I like storytelling for that because I'll tell someone a story about something I'm going to write, usually like my best friend Alyssa, and then she'll tell it back to me the next time I see her. And I'll be like, all right, we have something here. We can do a sketch from this. We can write this. And from there, it kind of helps me. I guess it's like an audio editor. There's very few people I would ever allow edit my stuff. But yeah, she's the one.
I'm going to shift gears because I want to talk about consuming stories for a moment. Because you have, through your podcast and just in life in general, like met a ton of people.
Mm-hmm. And
I feel like for whatever reason, and I could be wrong here, so correct me, but like people like to talk to you.
They do.
So like it's not that they're just, hi, Paula. It's like, hi, Paula, here's my whole story. Like they want to tell you their story. And I will say, first of all, your energy level is intimidating.
Not at 5 a.m. at the gym. See me like crawl in. Hello. No, but I like being the person people tell their stories to.
But is there like, there have to be some that are better than others. And I'm not asking you to pick a favorite, but like the stories that hit you the most or you know, in one way or another, right?
Yeah.
Do they have common elements?
The stories themselves don't. The connection to the individual telling the story does. So, yeah, there's a long answer to this. I think the best piece of advice I ever got about storytelling, I got this summer, and I haven't aired the episode yet, but I will be airing. It should be episode 3 of this season, possibly episode 2, because I don't know right now. And episode 1 is one of my favorite stories ever. And I find as I progress as an interviewer and as a podcaster, the stories I'm getting, which isn't like, you know, a box of chocolates, you get what you get. It's really mining for gold. And it's about getting, I think I said really early on, and it's that part's still true. It's not about a specific piece of information. It's about getting to a place with that specific person where they are comfortable enough to let their guard down and tell me something real. And that is, whether the story is true or not, it actually becomes immaterial, which is why I say don't fact check. But the best advice I got was this summer, this wonderful musician was in, and he has just such an incredible life story. His whole life is a beautiful story of like triumph and like oh my God, this guy was amazing. And he said, be the audience. That's the biggest gift that you can give somebody. Everyone can tell a story. Anyone can tell a story. There's good storytellers. There's bad. Certainly I have favorites. I usually call them out when they're happening because I'm sponsored by people I know and love. They don't care what I do on my show. And the privilege of being an engaged audience member, particularly in the format where I do it, where I take them from a very public, backstage, crazy space to an extremely intimate, knee-to-knee, tiny cottage studio in the middle of that mayhem, produces absolute beauty. Because I get to be the audience that they don't know that they need. And I hope, and it's a great privilege for me to get to try to do that for them. And you get great stuff. But I for sure have favorites.
But do you feel any... So when it comes to podcast storytelling, I will say I feel a bit of pressure, and I kind of feel like maybe I want to know if you do too, but like to be the audience is a bit of pressure. Like I know you. Like at this point, I'm interviewing you. We're having a conversation. I'm not interviewing, but because this show's more conversational. But like, I'm conversing with you, my friend Paula.
Yeah.
Like, so I feel like there's a responsibility for me to be like, Paula, I already know that, but the listening audience doesn't. Like, we haven't gotten anything in that, but like you are talking to bands that in some cases you've been following on the indie scene.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that audience responsibility beyond just being in the room and engaged for the story at the moment, but like thinking, like projecting forward, like I'm listening on behalf of my audience?
No.
Okay.
I don't. And that's because there's really nice reciprocity in what I do. It's really good for the bands to get the exposure. It's really good for the festival to have this weird little podcast trailer that people really want to go and do and then say they did. And it's really good for me, because I get to do the podcast and keep it going. But also I get to meet these people and kind of, bathe in the stories that they give me. And it's, I have never put that pressure on myself. I think Podcast Digest was especially good at that, where I knew Dan, like we met a few times, and then he had me on his show and he was able to really keep it like conversational, but he was also, very quickly able to delve into that he was a fan and that he was the audience, and I didn't know that at the time, and finding that out was kind of cool and actually scary and applied weird pressure on being the storyteller. But no, I don't. I maybe I did in the beginning. I'm like, okay, I have to make sure I get good stuff out of these guys. Because I'm making this show for people who wanted non-canned interviews. I knew there was a gap in the market because I lived in that gap. I'm like, I don't give a rat's arse what they're going to say, in their interview on MTV or CBC or any of these shows that interview them with the same 5 questions. I want to know something real about them. I want to know why they do this. I want to know who they are. I want like a real story. And I don't always get them, but my word, I try.
Well, that's kind of what the podcast medium has become, because anybody with access to anybody, because everybody's got a story.
Everyone Everyone's got a story.
wants that authenticness.
I think they do.
We don't, I put pressure on myself to be the audience because I spent a lot of time before launching this show being the producer and just being super hyper focused on like that, what the missed opportunities are, and being the it's almost like the after the fact director. Like, all right, so and so, you missed 3 opportunities for like obvious follow-up questions that you knew because he was your brother, but no one else is going to know what you're talking about for the next 5 minutes. Yeah. And I think it's only because I had that experience of like paying attention to those things that I have that in the back of my head.
Huh.
But
God, that would be a lot to walk around with.
But I don't have, as I do more of these, it becomes less and less about that and more about just, I want to have a good discussion, because I guess it's a safe space to say this to the people listening to this show. I'm not doing this to make money. I don't ever expect that this will turn into a $multi-$1,000, like just couple $1,000.
I'm so excited when like just my Libsyn bill gets covered. I'm like, woo!
So
Woo-hoo.
I don't expect that. So at the moment, I'm doing it for your entertainment, maybe your education, maybe to be informative, but it's got to be fulfilling to me. I've got to get something out of the conversation. It just so happens that a lot of these early episodes have been with people, friends.
Yeah.
And their conversations, you and I haven't had this conversation, but we've had similar conversations.
We've had similar. I took such a different route. I was like, man, like I was backstage at these, music events anyways, as you know, and people are telling great stories. And I'm like, well, hell, we should be sharing these. And I'm like, how come the media and the radio people are never back here to capture this? And the band member's like, well, because we'd stop talking if they were.
Well,
and
that's the key, right? Like you don't like, this is so, I don't know if it's my age or just me, but like you're not wearing the fedora with the little press like badge in the brim. Like you're not. And I feel
I never want to be.
They close up, and they like celebrities of any level or public figures of any kind start to get wary whenever mainstream press is around.
Yeah, I feel like people in general probably don't want to make a connection with someone who's clearly there to gain something. And that's true of like some of the more famous people I've interviewed, and some of the less. I interview like the volunteers there too, and the staff and like and the vendors. Like I interview all kinds of people just to to keep the practice going. And honestly, I find the same level of storytelling ability, and sometimes way better in people who aren't being asked very often. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like no one's going to open up if you're there with a pen and paper and writing, taking meticulous notes. I don't think, I'm very interested in human connection. I'm interested in the story, and I'm interested in the telling of the story. And you don't get there when it's an unequal footing. So that is why I built the mobile studio. That is why I made it beautiful and comfortable and inviting. That is why I got a, major beer sponsor instead of a candle company, I guess, to try and entice people to find a bit of comfort, solace, a little bit of space where they might actually say something to me that means something not just to me and the audience, but like that means something to them.
So I've listened to every episode of your show.
Whoa, thanks.
I haven't listened to an episode in a while. Hint, hint.
Oh my God. I just edited one right before I couldn't find my Skype password. So it's and odd coincidences, the guy came into the cafe today and he's like, oh, hey. I'm like, oh, hello. I better get to stepping. Yeah, so I did.
But it occurs to me that for a while, right, you were talking to non-musicians as well.
Yep.
But you were always talking to creative types.
Always.
Are there untold stories that you're just not going to get from creative types? Or creative, quote unquote, right?
Yeah.
Is across the gamut. So it's white collar, it's blue collar, it's everybody.
I don't know. Like, I think I would find it hard to meet someone who doesn't have a story. I think because at the base of it, that's what it is to be a person. However, creative types tend to tell stories better or be able to tell it in a more entertaining way. I've certainly had great stories told to me that were not airable. Either they just did not have good diction, or they were drunk, or they were, in various different ways unable to tell the story clearly, but it's still a stellar story. Those did go to the B-sides, and I did end up airing a bunch of those on Patreon, but I'm sure there's like an eternity of untold stories that I'll never get to. I'm so lucky to get the ones I do, and I feel so grateful when it happens that I try not to press to get more. I'm often just very like fulfilled with what they're willing to give me. And if I feel there's more there and it's not like a push, but if I can open a space for them to go into with that story, then I love to do that. But I'm also backstage at a really loud concert and people opening the door and it's hard.
So I want to diverge for a moment because your and my story, I don't know if you remember this. It doesn't start out necessarily the most amicably.
No. I want to hear you tell it.
I don't. Well, this is so.
How did we meet, Palmer?
We met in the 7 Days of Geek circle.
Yep.
Going into the second Podtoberfest.
Yeah.
And Bill and I were there, and Steph were there in the writer's room from the year prior.
Right. And
you and Dave and someone else whose name's escaping me.
The Canadian ringers.
There were others got added to the writer's room.
Right.
And Bill and I had a bit of a system.
Quite a closed system, by the way. To the listening audience, if you were not born into this, ye shall not pass. Keep telling it.
So, I don't remember anything other than being like, oh, this isn't going to work. We can't have more people.
Yeah, that's the welcome I got. I was asked and asked and asked and asked and asked to do this, by the way, and said no 300 times. And then on the 301st, I said yes, and then was like,
yeah, and then
ostracized by everyone. I'm like, what the hell is this? We don't need more writers. Well,
yeah,
sorry about your luck.
It was we were not the most open. I will admit.
Not at that time.
No. But we in fairness to us, not that we deserve anything, but like we had been burned a little bit. So
yeah, that's
like
fair.
We were trying
not by me.
No. But
I just
like,
showed up.
But we were trying to close ranks so we didn't get burnt again.
Yeah.
Because the first year it was like 4 of us creating content for 24 hours. And the second year it was more of us. Yep. But, Bill and I were still, you know what? It was really an insider perspective. We just didn't know you.
Yeah.
Right? So I know Jay, the Angry Ginger, was like asking all these people to be involved. And like Bill and I are like trying to plan this out, going like, we need ideas, not more people.
But those people were coming with ideas, you fools, you fools.
Well, yeah, okay, that's fine.
However, I don't think that was explained to you, and I never knew any of this.
No, we
I just showed up.
It was just kind of like, all right, so there was that was in the days when if you were gonna have a gathering of podcasters, you got a Twitter chat going,
right?
So it was just like, hey, and here's Paula. Wait, what? Who's Paula?
That's so crazy.
And then you were probably in like one or two of like the big like Skype gatherings.
Yeah.
Prior to, and you and I did not mix.
No.
But in hindsight, I can say this. It's because we're basically the same.
Yep. I'm like, you guys don't need me. You have Palmer. You don't need like an editor who also has creative idea. You have that. But yeah.
So fast forward, because like the rest of it's a blur until I get in the car with Bill.
Oh my God.
Like seriously.
We had like a lot more Skype chats though.
I
think you and I had already like gotten to like not a great place.
No, we got to a working place.
A working place. And then I'm like, this is gonna be interesting to meet this guy.
Well, and that's
and then I met you and you're so adorable. I'm like, oh my God. Well, and I loved you instantly.
That's the thing. I gave you a hug and like you've been my sister ever since.
Right? I was like, it was just so different meeting you. And I feel like that goes back to what you said at the beginning of like, is the story better in real life? It is for me and you, because we butted heads a lot in the beginning. You were like Team Grant and I was like Team Jason, and like and I was like, why are there teams? Why have I been asked to join this weird realm? I don't understand. I run a music podcast.
Yeah, it's weird. Like you joined an event that had sides.
Yeah. And I didn't know. And I had come from like, I'd had a workplace like that previously where there were two different sides. And I was like, thrust one. I'm just like, the fuck is that? I don't care what your beefs are with each other. I'm here to be creative and to do some good work. And I think as soon as you and I met in real life, that became obvious to both of us. We're both here for the same reason, and we both really fucking mean it.
Well, that's true. Like that's the thing, because I know that in person, it just felt like, and I don't mean to slight anybody. But like it just felt like producer Palmer earned the title. Like it's like you missed an ad. We have to do this thing. Like we have to do this. Like we should be prepping right now. Not like what do we have to do? And I think that being the same people, you were like, oh, he's got this covered. Yeah.
I'm like, he's good. I don't know why they need me or what, like what's up. But I mean, I still brought a lot. It's just, you did. And it was pitched to me in such a different way of like, hey, we need this organized, we need that, we'd like you to do this, we'd like you to do that. And I'm like, okay, like I'll do, I can do some of this, I guess. I could do, have my own show and shit. But like, yeah, it was exciting and interesting, and yeah. But it was really great meeting you. It was great.
I can only imagine, like, after those first couple Skype calls, you were like, who the fuck are these guys?
Yeah. It was a weird little group. But, still fun.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I still regret the fact that we never went for that run.
I know. I was like, let's go. And you're like, no. I brought my running gear, man.
I did too. I mean, I left my running shoes in the car the entire time, but
yeah,
I had them there.
I feel like I did go for. Did I go for a run?
I don't know.
I feel like I did.
It's it's one of those things like that I even remember as much as I do, because it was such a blur for those of us that were behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And
it was a lot. It was a lot of writing. It was a lot of editing. It was a lot of like posting. Yeah, it was a lot.
And, you know that because of what you do when you go to a festival and go behind the scenes and start interviewing people for what has to feel like one never-ending interview. Like,
it gets it's the big one's 3 days, so I was pretty used to 3-day events, and this was not as big, but the personalities were very big, and the history between the personalities was very deep. And I just came in to do a bit of production and a little bit of on air, and that was it.
Yeah, that's got to be. I mean, that's got to be scary. Like,
yeah, I think it was for Dave too. Yeah, it was. We were really kind of the outliers. Oh, Dave.
I mean, I think the only benefit I had was I had at that point gone back through the archives, so I had heard all the arguments.
Yeah.
From the two main hosts, we'll call them Mom and Dad. So I had heard them all 100 times before.
Yeah.
But it's probably also the reason I'm not doing that show anymore. Because, like, I was told I picked a side.
Yeah.
I don't know if I did, but that story is inconsequential. The moral of the story is that now I have a sister in Canada named Paula.
Right? Aw. Yeah. It was great. It was so instant. It was so different, and I got it. I got you instantly. And it never came across on Skype. We talked on the phone a bunch of times, never came across that we would actually get along. And we've stayed in touch ever since.
It's true. It's true. I mean, it's very odd that we needed that, right? Because I've made some fairly other personal connections, and I've met all of them at this point. But the initial conversations and relationships started digitally.
Yeah.
Because podcasting is not hyper local. And if you're going to start listening to people, you're going to start listening to people across the globe or across the country. Yeah. And I feel like I can point to you as like the one. It was like, it just wasn't a good digital relationship until after we met.
But ours didn't start organically, though. Like, had I just found you somehow in the Twitter sphere and we started talking, there would have been a reason. And had we met through any other circumstance, I don't think there would have been like initial animosity, because I can't find any other example in my life either where that has been the case.
It is a very interesting story.
Yeah, it is. It's so weird. And then the second we met, we're like, oh, you're just great. Yeah.
I mean, funny. Since then, right? Like, you were one of the biggest proponents for this show before it was even a thing.
Yeah, I was like, just do it. Just do it already. You basically have like an entire, 10 episodes in the can. You just need to talk to everybody you know. Which you are.
And I don't know why, but you're one of the few people I ever offered to edit a show for.
I know. Oof. And honestly, like, I almost took you. You're the closest I ever came to taking someone up on editing my show. And I feel like I did send a couple things to you.
You did. Yeah.
Yeah. Never have I sent to anyone else. So there you go. Right there. I mean, like, Alyssa for sure, but that's, we write together. So it's a little different, but.
And I was happy to see you kind of relaunch a blog for half a second.
I know, right? And so many people signed up. I feel so bad. I should send them the link to like my other blogs. I'm like, well, here's a whole bunch of backstory. You can have this.
We're basically just kindred spirits.
I feel like we are, like, in so many of our creative pursuits in particular, and we're both like kind of introverted extroverts. I've seen you be like mostly introverted, but in so many ways extroverted, and everyone thinks I'm an extrovert until they meet me.
I can fake it so well. Like, I'm an introvert, but like I can fake extrovert when I need to.
I can too, but I mean, I'm definitely Yeah, I can only like be on for so long and then I need absolute, but I mean, I meditate, so fair enough. I need absolute silence
Yeah,
for like a good portion of the day.
I won't say it's truly like Cinderella, like at midnight I turn into a pumpkin, right? But like I I can work a room. I
Yeah.
usually only do it if I have to.
Yeah.
And if given the choice, I will find the 3 people I'm most comfortable with and hang out with them for the entire evening. And then I need to be, I don't know, we'll say home.
Yeah.
To decompress. I don't meditate.
Yeah.
You've told me many times I should. I don't.
You should.
But instead of that, I come home and I do other forms of meditation, right? Like I just veg and listen to music and stuff. So,
you could do the actual meditation too. I'm just saying, I'm going to keep pushing it forever until you try it. It's so funny. Like, I think the truest mark of an introvert is someone who really does want to be alone. And when I did like tons of public speaking and, you know, a lot of basically live podcasts, we just weren't podcasting yet. I was alone on stage for all of them. And like the surest way to be alone is to go up in front of a crowd. There's no one up there. No one's talking to you. I mean, hecklers, sure, but it isn't, I don't know. I'm that type of introvert extrovert. I'm like, I can talk to a crowd of 300. I'm not so happy in a crowd of 3.
Wow.
It's hard.
Yeah.
It's harder. And then one-on-one, my favorite. I love it. Always. I will always choose that first.
Oh, one-on-one's great. I mean, I feel like you got to tell me if this is true for you. I have found that in party situations, when I find somebody to have a conversation with, I can make anyone else who shows up feel awkward just because I'm always going to be able to engage that one person. Somebody comes up, says hi, and I'm like, yeah, but about that thing. Like, and I can keep somebody talking.
Yeah.
While, you know, person 3 over here is just like, all right, I'm going to go away.
Oh, see, I feel too much for the person that comes up and feels rejected. I'm like, we can include you too. Unless they try to filibuster the evening and then I just quietly back away. Is that Prosecco? I've got to go.
Oh yeah. I'm definitely feeling like I need to get some more crackers. Like, I mean, that's the one thing I will say about parties.
Yeah.
You're never at a loss for an excuse.
No, it's true. And honestly, it's such a great gathering place for stories. That's what people are there to do. That's what a party is. It's a chance to tell your stories to some new faces.
This is true. Although I will say there is something to be said for old stories and old places.
Ooh.
Yeah, that made sense. So this past year, or this year, I guess, American Thanksgiving. I'll you know, this is an international show, so I'll be in, you know, all
we had our
encompassing.
Thanksgiving so long ago. You guys bump yours right against Christmas.
Sure we do.
How do they just like fly there, fly home, and fly right back? I don't understand how it gets done.
Usually it's like one family and then the other. Kind of a deal.
Really? One gets that's such a
usually. So I postponed hosting Thanksgiving because my parents have a thing they do. And one of my best friends has a thing he does. So we hosted on Friday. And everybody knows everybody. We all pretty much hang out together. Like my parents are local and my friend just moved literally a stone's throw away from my house.
Yay.
So we're all sitting around and basically just retelling old stories. I mean,
that's nice.
There were no new stories, and there is something to be said for our own oral histories.
Yeah.
Because, well, first of all, there are stories that our mothers will tell that none of us will about us.
Yes.
That's just a fact. And you are a mother, so you are probably starting to procure those stories.
Oh my God, I have so many. She's so amazing. I have like the funniest kid on the planet. It's so great.
So you're just
it's
waiting.
All stories.
So you're just waiting for like the first boyfriend to show up. Or like
girlfriend. Yeah. I
or
don't
girlfriend
know.
or best friend or what is
Yeah.
you're waiting for a someone tied to your daughter that you don't know that you can be like, have I got a story for you?
Yeah. Oh, I like telling stories. She really loves hearing stories of herself from when she was younger. She doesn't remember. That's a weird part of being a parent. And one day you may find out that the first 3 years where you're completely engaged with this human nearly 24 hours a day, certainly, as like I'm a pretty involved parent, they don't remember any of it. I'm like, well, we did outdoor school and, we camped on the island and like we hiked here and we did it. And she's like, I don't remember any of that. I'm like, well, I've got a story for you. And she finds it endlessly entertaining. And she now tells those stories from a first person perspective. And I know she has no memory of those things.
All right.
But in telling our stories, we learn ourselves ever better.
And how is she at retelling your stories?
She's better than me.
Really?
Already. She is the best storyteller I have ever met. I could not have scientifically created a better, more natural, funny. She's just, it's not just the humor. It's how funny she finds other people and other things in such a kind way. She's the most natural storyteller I've met. And I have a family just lit up with storytellers. If you think I'm high energy, you should come to Thanksgiving in Canada because it's pretty serious.
So does your daughter have the timing down too?
Better than me. Yep.
Really?
Yeah. And she's only 7. It's really crazy. I'm like, what is she going to be like as a teenager?
A handful?
I feel like she's going to be the same, only better. Like with every year has been my favorite year with her. Every year she's more developed herself, her sense of self, and her sense of humor comes through stronger but not, in a louder way, just in a better way. She's just, watching kids develop their sense of self it's just such a humbling experience of personhood. It's outstanding. Highly recommended.
Is you watching her like the ultimate story for you?
Oh, I think, yeah. I mean, it's so funny because it's so easy to she's so much more interesting than me. I feel like it's so easy to get caught up in that. And the absolute love affair that you have as a parent for your child is all encompassing and eclipsing in a lot of ways. But, she's already at that stage where like, hey, I'd like to have a friend over this weekend. And okay. And then all of a sudden it's every weekend and then sleepovers have started. And I see her, ebbing out into the world, not away, just out more and then, and then back. And I think getting to witness the beautiful story that is going to be hers is such a huge part of mine. It highlights some of the best of mine, but it isn't all of it. I'm still a whole person. I still have tons of my own stuff to do and stories to tell and live and be, but where we share stories and where ours align are just deeper and better. So,
I mean, it begs one question. Like it truly does, which is, when is she going to be on the Tell Me Stories podcast?
She has so many stories recorded. I could have my own second show. Like if Libsyn let you do that, where you didn't have to like pay all over again, I would fully have like she does my tagline better than me. She does my audio bite better than me. She doesn't listen to the interviews that I do. She really, like for Carly Rae Jepsen, she really wanted to be in the room. But otherwise, she could care less unless it's Shawn Mendes. She doesn't care who I'm talking to, and I will never get to interview Shawn Mendes. So, she's pretty into it, and she holds the mic right. It's just so funny. I mean, she's seen me do it 1,000 times, and she's been such a great supporter, and helps with the setup and tear down at the festivals. It's so great. She'll probably have her own show and it will do way better than mine. And I can't wait.
When?
Well, here's the thing. This is such a weird part of being a parent is I want her all to myself because I'm so selfish. But like one of her friends has her own YouTube channel.
They start so like
yeah, they're 7.
The friends I have with kids,
mm-hmm.
It's YouTube. So you should be thankful that your daughter would, if she ends up wanting a podcast, you should be like, thank you. Yeah. Like it's because it's got to be 100 times easier for a parent.
Yeah. It's a much lesser evil.
Oh, yes.
I mean, and I don't understand like what they could be doing that's even of interest to each other, but they're just playing with like their American Girl dolls. I'm like, well, you're Canadian, but okay. And that's it. That's the whole show. I'm like, oh, this is the thing. And then, you hear about like people paying money to buy a ticket to sit in a theater to watch somebody in a different country play a video game. And I'm like, are we living the fourth wall? Like, what are we doing? How is this entertainment to people? And yet it is. So
I will defend the only thing I know, and I only know some personalities on it, right? But I watch Twitch occasionally.
Yeah.
And Twitch is a platform, basically, if you're not familiar, it's where you watch people play video games.
Right.
However, the good performers, and that's what they aren't necessarily good at playing the game. They're good at storytelling and entertaining.
Really?
Yeah. So the personality, and I don't want to call anybody out because I'm only like on the periphery because Twitch kind of intrigues me as a platform. Like what's going on there? How does but the personalities I've found, and that's what they are really engaging. And whether it's with their chat or without their chat, they're telling stories. They're explaining what's going on in the game. But the most of the ones that I find myself returning to, talk about things completely unrelated to the game. It's like, oh, somebody asked me a question in chat about what I do when I finish college. And then for the next 15 minutes, we're regaled with like his story of leaving college and like what the real world is really like. And it's just kind of like a podcast where the guest is a chat room and you watch him play a video game while it happens. So I can see in some ways how video in that regard works. But again, it's literally just another platform for storytelling. I mean, maybe some people are watching the games, but like,
for sure. But I have never known that side. I never would look, but I never knew that side of it. But it stands to reason though. I mean, like a lot of my audience base, which like sage advice from Agent Palmer, talk about yourself more, because I wasn't in the beginning. And you did push that like fairly early on. And, I started sprinkling it in. And then what people wrote to me more about and the response I got, was much stronger and higher, and my numbers went up as soon as people knew a bit more about me and saw a bit more about my life. They really tuned in at a much higher rate and a much more consistent rate. Even when they didn't know the band, they stayed because they found me entertaining, which is like hilarious to me, but awesome, and gets you the downloads you need to keep the roof over your tiny podcast studio.
Well, so don't forget,
stands to reason.
Your podcast, just like my podcast, as hosts, we're the only consistent thing.
Well, yeah, true story.
That's it. So
I think I have a consistent theme.
You have a consistent theme.
Indie music in Canada.
It's a pretty niche
for that audience
theme too. Like
for that niche audience right there. It's like my sister and one friend.
but they're going to come back for you.
Yeah, and they have, which is great. And fair enough. Like I know how to tell a story and I really enjoy telling it. And I think that's maybe the difference is I love telling stories. And hopefully the people I have on this show love telling stories. And if not, I tell them a story and then that helps them tell their story. So it kind of is a means to an end to try to get, a really great one out of them, I often have to share my own stuff with them. And it works. It's nice. There's really great reciprocity in storytelling. It's not just a, one woman show. It's you have to have an audience, and most storytellers are looking for an audience. It's great to be one.
I mean, I've said this before on this show, but I've always found it more helpful for other people when I'm on Skype and they're recording solo.
Huh.
I can tell the difference between episodes that were recorded without me as the silent audience.
Yeah.
When they're basically just talking into GarageBand or Audacity or whatever thing they're using.
Yeah.
Versus them recording into the same thing, but looking at me.
That's interesting.
Skype. Because
interesting.
I don't have to say anything. I just have to be there.
Huh.
And
that's really cool. I never thought about that.
And it's one of the things that, listen, it's not a requirement for everybody. Because, I think my intros and outros are pretty good, but I'm sure they'd be better if I was looking at someone instead of talking to my screen.
I mean, you'd think.
It stands to reason, but
it does. Yeah, that's interesting. Because when I do my explanations of the shows and intros and outros and that type of stuff, it's really just to get it done. It's because I have to thank my sponsors. I have to tell them where to find me. Everyone knows where to find me, but I have to do those things.
Come on, Paula, it's always somebody's first.
I know. Please go to www. It's really it's interesting to think, especially for the ones where I talk about the experience of my being with the band. That to me is a diary entry where I would never be able, if someone was, on the Skype screen, I wouldn't be able to do it in the same way. Maybe I would do it way better. That's just open to whole junket of possibility for me. But as it is, it's a diary entry for me. And I discuss, what my experience was like. And when I did basically anthropological ethnographies during my university years, the lowest grade I ever got was when I wrote an ethnography on my sister. And I was a very, very staunch academic. I did well in school because I accepted nothing less than doing well in school. And for me, a B+ was you might as well have just kicked me out of school. It was the lowest grade I ever got. And I was devastated. And it was from my favorite professor. And I had done a beautiful presentation of it as well. And it was a medical ethnography because my sister's, in medical books and all kinds of, exciting jazz. And she's defied all odds and lived to tell the tale. And it's been hell on earth. And it's a huge part of my story, is her story. And I went to my professor and I said, "What the hell happened?" And he said it right back to me. He's like, "Yeah, a huge part of her story is your story and you're nowhere in here." And I had left myself out of the story completely. He's like, "Do you not think that your sister may have collided with you at some point in her life? And in the writing of this ethnography, you sat down with her 100 times. You're nowhere in here. And you have to be." That is what an ethnography is. That is what storytelling is. It is the exchange.
So I will give you a story, another story, which is one of the things I've noticed in listening back to my intros and outros.
Yeah.
Is I seem to have picked up a little something from one specific place. I seem to be sermonizing a bit in my intros and outros.
So easy to do.
It's I don't know. Listen, so I'm a relaxed Jew. Reform is a bit still strict for me.
I like it.
But when I was younger in my formidable years, and I was fairly regularly going There was a rabbi who made an impression on me, and one of the things he made an impression on me with is his sermons, which I guess I picked up a little bit because, like, listening back, I'm like, and here's the turn, and here's the moral. Like, there are just, it's just the way it is. And I mean, there is a part of me that for a moment in time, half a moment, considered being a rabbi.
Wow.
But I could never get a handle on Hebrew, so that was never going to happen. Because you can't make a living writing sermons for other people.
Not so much.
But if anybody out there wants to give me a job doing it, I'm sure I can.
I am available.
I am available, but it's just one of those unique things that I picked up.
Yeah.
Somewhere, like, obviously I know where I picked it up, but just that I picked it up, like, and now here it is showing itself. Like, all right.
Cool.
The other side of that is being able to, when I edit these episodes, go through and find the common theme. Because while I start out with a topic, a starting point, I never dictate the end. So I have to listen to a live conversation and pick out where it went and what, and a lot of them have stayed on topic, but not all of them do. And
for sure,
that's basically what not just rabbis, but priests do. They read a section of a text and then they figure out how to make it current. I mean, I don't. I'm not. I'm just trying to relate the conversation to the audience in a simpler way and then sum it up nicely at the end.
Ooh. I think that's all they're doing anyways, just in Hebrew.
That's fair. I mean, I'm glad I didn't become a rabbi.
I mean, yet. One never knows what the future holds. You could be like a podcasting rabbi.
Well, that's a thought that's going to fester.
You'd have to be a practicing Jew then, I think.
Well, more than a relaxed one.
Yeah, I would say. That's really... Well, let me know if you do. I will attend a lecture. Is that what it's called? What's it called?
A service.
A sermon? A service?
It would be a service.
Service.
I'd have to put something together.
Oh, God. I mean, literally.
Yeah. So, process, which was a part of episode 1, blogging, which was a part of episode 2, podcasting, which was episode 3, all play a part in this episode. For that matter, so is art and artistry, covered well in episode 7 and 8, history, which we covered in episode 5. So we only missed out on touching on every previous episode by not talking about careers, but Carl's episode was basically just one giant story, so that would include episode 6, and Margot and I tell some fun stories about our youth on episode 4, so we've covered all the previous episodes in some way. And there was no doubt about that, because as Paula said, and I agree with her, storytelling is important. It's part of who we are, and as a podcaster and blogger, it is basically what I do. And while the beginning of this intro was a little self-serving, I'll admit, it was also not hard to make those lines of connection between this episode and the 9 that have come before it. Of this podcast, before it even existed, I once wrote, "This podcast is about knowledge, gaining it and sharing it through discussion and debate." And there is no better way to share that knowledge than through storytelling. That's it. Period. The end. But storytellers are different. As mentioned during the episode, I wrote a piece of fiction recently, though still a while ago, that was titled The Death of a Storyteller. I've talked about it before. I am proud of that story. I am happy to say that Dan Lizette did an amazing narration on it, and I did my best to create a video that supports it. That story is about the loss of a grandfather, but it is also the loss of a storyteller, which is like losing not just one book, but volumes and volumes of them. And as Paula glowingly talked about her daughter, storytellers don't just come in the form of our elders. Storytellers are everyone. We do it all the time. But what we don't all do is create something with those stories. That is what separates the creative types from everyone else, which leads me back to Paula. The thing about Paula and I being two peas in a creative pod is that in my experience, creatives just find each other. Maybe it wouldn't have been Paula, but I'm sincerely glad it was. Episode 9's guest, Jason Zapata, and I go back to high school sharing our poetry and creative works. And while we both took different paths, we haven't given up on our creative pursuits. I found Kristen Meyer, guest 2, and Bill Sweeney, guest 1, through online communities, and with the two of them, I'm basically thick as thieves, and they too are creatives. The friends we keep are as important as the things we do. And looking back at my origin story with Paula and the fact that I have planned some origin stories and guests upcoming here on the podcast as well, it's interesting to look back and see where I came from and what I've become. Because this is episode 10, it's a round number, and we as podcasters and humans like round numbers. I have reflected a bit. 10 isn't necessarily the milestone I'm willing to share as a triumph, but it is a fairly good sample size for me to finally ask for ratings and reviews. So if this is your first episode and you're listening because of Paula, you should hopefully be able to find 2 other shows of the other 9 that might interest you, which would allow you to take the 3-episode challenge and see what you think of this show. If you've been listening the whole time, thank you. I'm flattered, and I really do want to know what you think. Thanks for listening to the Palmer Files, episode 10. As a reminder, all links are available in the show notes, and now for the official business. The Palmer Files releases every 2 weeks on Tuesdays. If you're still listening, I encourage you to join the discussion. Let me know what you think, as I just asked. You can tweet the podcast at the Palmer Files, myself at Agent Palmer, and reach this week's guest, Paula Allen, at stories_podcast, and her website, tellmestoriespodcast.com. The show email is thepalmerfiles@gmail.com, and don't forget to visit agentpalmer.com to see what I've got going on. You can also hear more of me in the meantime on Our Liner Notes, a musical conversation podcast with host Chris Meyer, and my other gig as co-host of the Podcast Digest with Dan Lizette. I'll give you 2.
Okay. All right. Are you reading fiction or nonfiction right now?
Right now?
Yeah.
Fiction.
Fiction?
Yeah.
Interesting. What are you reading?
I'm reading Goodbye Mickey Mouse by Len Deighton.
Ooh, how is it?
It is probably the most... So I've been reading through Len Deighton's bibliography because of my brand. Right.
Oh, yeah.
I stole Palmer from the Ipcress File movie, and I was like, well, I should read the book, and I fell in love with it, and I've been reading through, and he did a lot of nonfiction about World War II.
Yep.
And this is fiction about World War II.
Ooh.
But the thing that makes...
That'd be well written.
He's written realistic fiction about World War II as well.
Yeah.
But this one in particular... There's a romance in the beginning of it that's probably one of the best romances that, or maybe the only romance that's really been in one of his. You know, and I'm very worried for this relationship because it's the beginning of, you know, like the one American just got there, and you know,
I'm very worried.
While he's the lead, I don't know, maybe he'll die. It's a war, you know, he's a fighter pilot. There's never any guarantees.
I mean, the odds are.
But it's one, I don't know what it is. It could be that I've already kind of slogged through the nonfiction of World War II that I was like, well, I set my sights to read everything he wrote. I'm going to do it in the order he wrote it in, and I'm not going to just cut corners. So I read a lot on World War II that I otherwise wouldn't have. So
Yeah.
I have the base of knowledge that I know he already knows because he wrote those books. Like I'm reading them in the order they were published. But there's just something about this book that it's like, I don't know. Like it's more engaging to me, and I don't know if it would have been. I think part of it is the journey, right? So all the other World War II things.
Yeah.
So I know how factually accurate he's being.
I think that adds a depth and a nuance, though.
It does, but there's also these characters who are basically struggling for survival in World War II bombed out Britain.
Wow.
It's different than some of the other spy fiction of his that I've read.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. That sounds really worthwhile, actually. Taking notes. What is, final question?
Sure.
What is at the top of your playlist?
What is at the top of my playlist? At the moment, a lot of Canadian bands.
Yeah.
And it's not because I'm talking to you, but like today, for example, I listened to 5 artists. Okay. Because I have an Amazon device, and I'm like, hey, play X, right?
Yeah.
So today I asked it to play the Tragically Hip.
Yep.
I asked it to play Bob Dylan's Oh Mercy album.
Ooh.
I asked it to play The Beaches.
Yeah, Beaches.
I asked it to play The Trues.
Aw.
And I asked it to play the Gin Blossoms.
Nice.
Those are the 5 bands I listened to today.
Mix. You're spanning decades with that mix.
And genres, and I'm showing my elder millennial, almost Gen X roots.